So today's screen, this is the final part of the presentation where I just have screenshots about Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop for more clarification. We're first going to start with Adobe Camera Raw. So for the basic session, I use like a white balance and I just, click the gray card and I neutralize the colors. For HDR photography, I zero out the highlights, I plus out the shadows. Then I increase the exposure and contrast to get the effect that I like. And then I have the texture and clarity between 5 and 7. For black and white, I now do it all in Photoshop. I used to decrease the saturation all the way and decrease the vibrance saturation, but I do everything in Photoshop. But for light painting, I just leave the highlights and shadows alone. And I just, use a white balance with a gray card. And then later on, I talk about, remove chromatic aberration and use camera profile. I just check the 2 check boxes. And I talk about that later. The curve section, I just make it like an S. And I just form it up here. I don't touch this. I could, but I just prefer to make the S curve up here.
So when you do the S curve, how do you know which line to increase and which one to decrease?
If you go up, it'll change. You go down. So you could do it over here, but I just like to do it up here. I just try to make it S. So this becomes lighter if you go this way. It becomes darker if you go this way.
Right. Okay.
Now for sharpening, I like to use, for non-portrait related, 140. Portraits, I like to use 120. For the noise reduction and everything, I like to use 50. I like to use between 30 and 35 in color noise reduction. Sometimes I have to view it by 100, and I just increase the noise reduction until I see block spots, that I decrease it. I like to use between 30 and 35 for the detail. For the optics, I just want to remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections. They'll tell you the lens that we're using. I was using the 85. This is just a different, snapshot. And I'll tell you the lens that you're using. When I have both of these checked. Now for the geometry, I just use the A. It does a great job. It's the most accurate and quicker way. I could rotate it, the verticals, but I like to do that in Photoshop, but I just like to click on this. And for the effects, you get vignetting, but I'm more worried about what the photograph looks like than the number, because if it's too dark, it'll be obvious. And that's why I look at the photograph more than the number. And I could. And we have Photoshop. Our first action, for to do HDR, we select the 3 files. I run this action, this happens. It's auto align and auto blend layers of the edit menu. Then I run another action where it's the image, auto tone, auto contrast, auto color. I run these 3 things. Now, what I do is I use actions and groups. I duplicate the layer and I play this action. When I play this action happens. If you save, this action happens. And these are my beginning set of actions that I use, either single or in groups. The thing about Photoshop is you can go to a new location and remember the new location when you run the action. This is the, dodge or burge group of actions where the last set is the signatures, black and white. And then the second to last is the levels adjustment layer. Then burn out of the Luminosity blend mode, you dodge out of screen blend mode. So when I run this, this happens, which is here. Then I run this, this happens. Then these two last happen. So my actions, call it other actions, happen one after the other. And, you know, one is for the black signature, one is for the white signature. And this is in 3 actions. This is a dozen scratches, and this is the noise, the despeckle. And when I run this action, this happens, and I have it to 1.3, and then this happens. And then the high pass, this happens. And then when I do the frame development, where I call this action, this actions, so this happens. Then this, I call this happens. This is basically got a condition. If it is landscape, this happens. If it's not, this happens. And then other actions happen too. So this is what my photograph looks like after I run that previous action. The longest side is 4,000 pixels, resolution 300 pixels per inch, automatic. The height is 4,000. If the height were the longest, it was 4,000. For the unsharp mask, I like to have it at 200%. I like to keep the radius at 1.0 pixels. And maybe in HDR, I could do 1.5. I always like to use 1 because I want to focus on, it's more accurate with 1 pixel than 1.5. I like that better. And the threshold is good between 6 and 7 levels.
Mm-hmm.
And the background actions, another set of actions where when I click on this, the speckle happens, then the dust and scratches happen, then the unsharp mask, then you fade, that the last filter use would be fade unsharp mask. And I have it at blending mode of luminosity 100%. Another set of actions where I use it a speckle, which is here. I say play action speckle, this happens. Then the unsharp mask, this happens. And then dust and scratches. And I decided not to use that fade blend mode of luminosity. My JPEGs, workflow is where I export it, quality 100. I ask every time where I want to export it, and it remembers the last time where I put the files. If you want to post on a web, use convert to sRGB, or you want to copy and paste in Photoshop, do not check this because you'll have a profile mismatch problem. Another way to save it is just, the MVC legacy, then you export it, and you can change all these settings within the dialog. Photoshop, remember the last location you use if you create a folder. So if you save 10 JPEGs, the 9 have to remember where you saved them. For light painting, this is where I make a selection with the lasso. Don't worry about a perfect selection. And then this action, paste and special, when I run this action, it will paste into place, but it's a light and blend mode. And then I'm painting in detail. I'm painting on a black layer mask. I'm painting in white because I want to reveal more of the lighting and light painting. All I have to do is just make a selection and click on this action. It'll be a button mode, or you could just click on this and click on the play button. Then it's frequency separation, where it's in a group of layers. One of them, it's a high frequency, high pass. Whoops. Yeah. Well, this is great for cloning. And this is if you want to do selections. So when I run this, I have a frequency. When I click on frequency separation, it will form this layer and this layer, and I'll put them in a group, and it's called frequency separation. High pass, you have a high pass prompt drill, high pass, filter prompt. You have a blend mode, linear light. Yeah, black and white actions where, channel mixer, you zero out a red or a green or a blue, you do one at a time. You can do the same thing with, you set the monochromatic, and then the vibrance, you negative out the vibrance and the saturation. Then the gradient map, I like to use it, but I'd like to change the blend mode to color. And then the black and white, you just run a saturation, but you negative out the hue, you negative out the saturation. If you want to adjust the contrast, you work with the lightness channel. Then the threshold is just a threshold layer, but you just change a blend mode to color and you get a cool black and white. And then there's other black and white, more complicated, and where you have actions and folders, and you combine them and you get a cool black and white. So this is what my workflow looks like. My layers, like to use a navigator. Got my actions, like these actions in button mode. Got my tools and my brush.
Mm-hmm.
So these are my, Facebook groups, my still life fine art photography creator group, architect, city states Facebook group, and my another fine art group, light painting group. Some of these are run by myself, some of them are run with other people, and then my clubs. I think this is a club that you're in. These are my business links: Instagram, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, my fine art website, my general photography website, my YouTube channel. That's where I post all the recordings. So do you have any questions? You can always email me at mpitcherley@art2016@gmail.com, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or meetup message. So I'm assuming, do you have questions or not?
No, I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, well, you liked it, and I'm going to
I
put.
really like the post-processing part of it, because that's, especially Photoshop, that's my weakest link right now. So that was really good to see that,
Yeah,
and how you used Camera Raw and all that.
yeah, Photoshop is not easy to learn, but it takes practice. So I'd recommend just keep trying at it.
I'm still learning Lightroom, and I've been getting fairly good detail in Lightroom, but I do want to transition Photoshop, and I've just got the Topaz products, the denoise and the sharpen, and I'm trying to determine whether to do that as a plugin in Photoshop or Lightroom. Do you use those products at all?
I used to use exposure software, also use Nix software. I looked at Topaz, I may look at it again. But they have great, Nix software has great noise controls, plugins.
Well, thanks for doing this. I really enjoyed it.
Good. So then I'm going to end the presentation. If you have any questions, you can just email me at mpucciarelli or 2016@gmail.com, or just through any social media that I use.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks.